Drednaw! This Pokemon rocks! Have I used that joke before? No matter. Drednaw is a fascinating Pokemon and has quite a few bits of stuff behind it. You might think, oh, it's just an alligator snapping turtle with the broken can that opens for a head. And, I mean, that's a part of it, but if you really want to see how deep it can be, then come along. Let's dive right in. Now, I know I've used that joke before, but there's no such thing as originality anymore. Not even among our own videos. No. Done. It's done. We're done. It's bad. It's bad. Let's pack it up. I've said every joke possible already. So, we're done. Alright. I've decided it's fine to reuse jokes, because ultimately, why the shell not? We're not some totalitarian regime where I can't reuse jokes or anything. Anyway, Drednaw. First things first, what's with its typing? If you watched our Gen 8 Pokemon Types Explained video, you would know Drednaw is inspired by the Dreadnaught, as well as cartoony depictions of snap traps or bear traps. British cartoony robots also, and things. So why in the 9 realms is it rock type? Is it just because the shell is as hard as rock? Is that the only inspiration here? The only interpretation? Well, no, actually. It's quite cool. You see, it turns out turtles and tortoises eat rocks. Just eat them, just straight up. They eat them for things like calcium and iron. But because they can, just because they can doesn't mean that they should or that it's the best for them. They do it to compensate for an otherwise lacking diet. Their shells and bones require a lot of calcium and iron to maintain, and if they can't get it from their regular food, then they eat rocks out of desperation. So if your pet turtle or tortoise is eating rocks, you should probably reevaluate what you're feeding it. But still, they can and do eat rocks, and are colloquially called living rocks by many. Also, their shells are tough. They basically are living rock type Pokemon. So really, why wouldn't this thing be rock type? Though really, as you'll see, steel type would probably have worked better if it had a slight design tweak. Like, I get that its shell being rough like that makes it look kind of rocky as opposed to steely, but you know, the rest of its origins point more to steel type, but I guess, I get it. And iron, you know, it eats the rocks for iron. Iron has to do with the rest of its origins also, as you'll see, and so iron is kind of a rocky metal. But whatever. One big thing of note is that Drednaw more so resembles a tortoise than a turtle. You can tell by its shell and feet. You see, one of the biggest differences between a tortoise and a turtle is that one can swim and one cannot. So you see, that tortoise is dead now because they thought it was a turtle. Or, you know, it would be dead if they didn't save it post-recording. Allegedly. But here, look. You can tell by the shells. A turtle shell is sleeker, while a tortoise is more dome-shaped, and often more spiky and bumpy as well. Though there are some turtles with spiky shells, but it's mostly a tortoise trait. And also, usually turtles have wider, more webbed feet, if not just straight up flippers, and tortoises have more elephant-like feet. They are more cylindrical. So Drednaw, while a mix of both, I suppose, is primarily a tortoise. So what does a land-based animal have to do with boats? Well, it's actually some pretty neat history. For a long time, as in most of human history, refrigeration wasn't a thing. So, salt was extremely important because it could preserve meats. It was one of the only ways to preserve food over long voyages. So important, in fact, that several wars were fought over salt mines, and merchants became rich from trading the stuff. During this time, we still used wooden boats to travel and trade and even hunt whales. And while you were out on these boats, all you had to eat was meat that was heavily salted. And it would be next to impossible to eat just that in one big sitting because the stuff was like eating leather. Basically, you only had salt-flavored jerky and this other stuff called hardtack, which was a cracker made from flour and water. And sometimes salt if you were lucky. And it's also super dry and gross. And now you may ask, Lockstin, you sexy devil, what does that have to do with tortoises and boats? Well, once upon a time, Western Europe, which includes Britain because every Gen 8 Pokemon is British, was all about expeditions, exploration, and exploitation. For a very long time, their sailors suffered through so many problems, from scurvy to starvation, because all they had to eat was a hardtack and leathery salted jerky, and it was bad and not healthy and gross. But in the 16th century, these explorers discovered the Galapagos Islands. And you see, it was an island that answered their prayers, because food literally walks up to you out of curiosity. And it's too slow to get away. For the next 3 centuries, Galapagos tortoises were the perfect solutions to their food problems. These sailors would be on long expeditions, and would need food to eat, so they would make stops whenever possible. Heading west to get to the east because the world is round? The Galapagos are like the last big islands you have before crossing the world's biggest ocean. And when going the other way, you just crossed a massive ocean! Your poor stockpiles! Thank God for these islands. Tortoise stew. And also, yes, even Charles Darwin himself partook in this tortoise meat. Sailors would walk up to these tortoises on these islands and just start rolling them. Here's a tortoise, just gonna roll it onto the ship. It fit a few tons of these tortoises on board, and unlike other animals like chickens, pigs, and cows, they didn't need to eat all the time, so they didn't really need to be taken care of. These tortoises can go a year without eating or drinking even, and so they just roll them onto the boat, and then just sit there. They'd wait to be eaten. They were so scared from the rocking of the boat that they'd stay inside of their shells. And just to top it all off, apparently, they were incredibly delicious. Some accounts state that this tortoise meat was the most delectable meat they had ever had. Not sure if that's because they actually were that delicious or because these sailors just spent months eating nothing but crackers and jerky. But either way, tortoises, Galapagos giant tortoises, were suddenly a huge part of sailor culture. Also, fun fact, sailors were known for eating dodos for food, because these dodos were just so stupid and easy to catch. But the problem was they tasted awful. They absolutely hated the dodo meat. It was a thing of desperation that they ate these dodos. But then they found out if you cook dodo meat in Galapagos tortoise fat, muy bueno. These tortoises were literally saviors of these sailors, and also the reason the dodos went extinct. Yeah, you can thank the tortoise for that. It has nothing to do with the people. It's the tortoise's fault. But now you know why in the classic bit of literature Moby Dick at one point they stop at an island just to pick up tortoises. It was to eat them. And it had become a huge tradition by that point. So yes, tortoises have ties to boats. And there's more, but before we dig into that, let's talk about our other main inspiration, the one that comes from the animal kingdom. Out of all of the turtles and tortoises that are real, the alligator snapping turtle is by far the closest one to Drednaw. I mean, look at it. It is quite clearly a big chunk of inspiration, and we know this for a couple of reasons. Drednaw has the signature spikes of the alligator snapping turtle for one, but it is also known as the bite Pokemon, and also has its signature move, which involves latching onto the target and never letting go, which just happens to be what the powerful jaws of the alligator snapping turtle do as well. They grab onto their prey and do not let go until the prey dies, often due to drowning, or just having a giant gaping wound in the mouth of a turtle that slowly bleeds them to death. And its snapping turtle inspiration also explains its bear trap inspiration. Maybe you've seen the videos of people catching snapping turtles. You may have noticed that they tend to dredge them up from deep in the mud, and that's because that's how these turtles hunt. They bury themselves entirely in mud except for their jaws, and then they move their tongues around, acting kind of like a worm, and then when they feel something nibble on its tongue, snap! It's dead. Or dying. Basically, they hunt like how a bear trap is used to catch people. Oh yeah, fun fact, bear traps were made to catch people, but the British-Canadian inventor was named Conibear. Thus it became known as the Conibear trap, soon shortened to bear trap. But anyway, you lay a bear trap down and you cover it in stuff like leaves and dirt so that it's not super obviously a trap. Just like how that turtle buries itself in the mud and has its stuff buried. It's not obviously a trap, it looks like a thing, and then you... It works the same way. That's why Drednaw has the really stupidly shaped head. There's a reason behind it. It's not just because it's dumb. Now let's check out its G-Max form. It's weird. Its nose grows and becomes a figurehead, those pole things at the fronts of old boats. So if it's based on a wooden boat like that, should it not have a sail? Instead of armor covering up where the sail would go? well, my dear viewer. This actually makes perfect sense and is pretty neat. And right now seems like the perfect time to talk about the US Civil War, which works well because this also happens to be the area that the alligator snapping turtle live, the deep south, and like they go up a little bit to the north. Anyway, so the Confederates did some things, but at least this one was neat. Towards the beginning of the war, the Confederacy began taking Union ground, forcing the Union to do the scorched earth tactic. This is when you take what you can from an area you are about to retreat from, and then just burn all the other stuff so that your opponent can't use it after they get the land. When the Union was eventually retreating from Portsmouth, Virginia, they did just that, and set the whole shipyard on fire, destroying the warships so the Confederacy couldn't use them. Once the Confederates took this land over, their Gideon Willies, probably mispronouncing that name, gave orders to dredge up whatever they could find. Keyword, dredge. Like how people dredge up snapping turtles from the mud, and also potentially where part of the name Drednaw comes from. Dredge? Maybe. But the idea was that it was easier to repair a broken and burned ship than it is to make one from scratch. You know? One of the few things they managed to salvage was a complete wood bottom of a big boat. And when they saw this, got an idea. Their general commissioned a huge iron shell that could cover the top of that wooden boat, leaving no part of that boat exposed from above the water. Essentially, they just made a water-based tank. Oh, what's that? Naval warfare is evolving? Congratulations! Your boring soft wooden boat evolved into an ironclad! Now look at Drednaw. If it was to swim in the water, it would appear like an ironclad ship. Just a heavily armored top sticking out above the water. During its initial battles, this ship was near indestructible until the Union eventually made their own ironclads. Because, I mean, think about it. What are you gonna do against that? Shoot it with a bullet? It's bulletproof. Hit it with a cannon? It's cannonball proof. What are you gonna do? When you had an ironclad versus a traditional wooden ship, what? The ironclad didn't even need to waste its ammo or gunpowder. It would just ram into the other ships until they sank. And looky, it is a common trope in kaiju movies to have a swimming gigantic beast ram into the military ship, sinking it. And speaking of military ships, that's exactly what the Dreadnought is. In 1906, the British Royal Navy's Dreadnought was the first battleship, the next step in evolution from the ironclad. It changed the tides so much that all earlier made warships would become known as pre-Dreadnoughts. And look, that hole on Drednaw's nose spike thing? Sure, alligator snapping turtles have similar nostrils. Maybe it's also there because it's kind of like a cleaver. Snapping turtles cleave things like a cleaver. But also, the first Dreadnought had holes just like that, right up front. Even the USS Texas, the only Dreadnought still in existence, has them too. Even more dominantly, I might add. And so, even if the bulk of its inspirations are American rather than British, the argument can still be made for the every Gen 8 Pokemon is British idea. These ironclad ships played a major part in the Industrial Revolution, which the British spearheaded and set the stage for the huge British Royal Navy's next advancement. And it popularized using anthracite in steam engines, which we mentioned in the Colossal video. So yes, it is a perfect fit in Galar, a Pokemon relating both to the Industrial Revolution and a Navy warship, and global expeditions. That's quite literally 3 British things. Just about as British as can be, honestly. Just give it a monocle and some tea. There you go. It is 100% British. Don't even care if it's an American turtle. It's still British. It's got tea and a monocle and all those other things. So what do you think? Did you learn something? Think it's dumb because of its head shape still? I do. But do you have anything to add? Let me know down below, and until next time, never stop using your noggin or going to noggin.net because there's cool merch there. Don't be a tortoise and not go there anytime soon, because you'll miss out. Supplies are always limited.